What would be assigned to you after the fall elections that the Republicans could not cash in, could not really make hay out of what you're talking about the Democrats' weakness being? I mean, is it a matter of taking over the House? Is it a matter of catching the Senate? What would be failure by the Republicans?
Well, there are a couple different things you'd look at. Obviously, marginal races are the first measure. I mean, certain races, you know what's going to happen. In a wave election like this, as I said, the incumbent party is going to get hurt. And some seats, which were essentially toss-up seats that Democrats won when there was a Democratic wave, will, of course, revert to Republican seats. But the races you look at to see if there's a broader realignment going on are races for, like the California Senate race. Will Barbara Boxer lose? Barbara Boxer was elected last time. She's been re-elected twice by the largest margin. She received more votes than any Senate candidate in American history. So she closed pretty well last time. She's pretty tough to beat. If she loses this time, boy, that sends a pretty clear message that there's a problem with the Democratic message. The other thing you look at, of course, is what is the Republican message, and are they getting it through? Like, quick, from a dead sleep, what are the three things Republicans stand for? I don't know. They have to sell that.
Okay, let's go to Pam, Democrats line in League City, Texas. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm a fervent Barack Obama supporter, and I've always said these two things that I'm getting ready to quote from two very mainstream journalists. The first one was David Ignatius, who said he felt that Barack Obama was not political enough, and then Mark Halperin said he doesn't believe that Obama does things for political reasons. Your comments?
Well, I know both of the men you just quoted and respect them. Those quotes are ridiculous. I don't know if you're quoting them correctly or not, but I don't think if you were to call either one of those guys, Ignatius or Halperin, this morning, that they would be willing to say that. Again, this is an enormously political, in my view, almost embarrassingly political administration, and that's certainly something that you could defend. This is politics, after all. I'm the last one to feign horror or shock when we discover politics among our politicians, but it's impossible to argue that these guys aren't pretty Machiavellian, because they absolutely are.
News reports say that Peter Orszag will be leaving the administration.
Yes.
Tell us about what you think that means. There's also reporting today speculating on how long Rahm Emanuel may stay as White House Chief of Staff. We have a story from Politico called Rahm's Long Goodbye. For all the talk about Rahm Emanuel reaching for the eject button, the fiery White House Chief of Staff isn't leaving in the immediate future and could serve well into 2011, according to people close to him.
Well, I mean, it does. The Orszag question, I'm less certain on. I have a number of theories, but I won't inflict them on your viewers. That's
what we have you here for.
It's too early for my crackpot theories. As for the Rahm question, it's amazing the degree to which the story always becomes about Rahm. So in the 1993 inauguration of Bill Clinton, I was here, it seems like just yesterday, 17 years ago. Rahm Emanuel had his own car with his name on the side in the procession, in the parade, as a very junior, 30-ish White House staffer. I'm not criticizing him. I mean, it takes huevos to do that. It's impressive in its way, but it's very, very bold. I mean, this is a person who instinctively calls attention to himself, and it's amazing that he can get away with that as White House Chief of Staff day after day. Stories about Rahm's political future. It's like, who cares? His job is to serve the president. He's he's a staffer. He's a servant. And yet, front page of Politico today, Wither Rahm. And again, I'm not criticizing him. It's kind of funny. You wonder if the president, looking back, thinks this was a wise choice to pick someone who would divert the attention to himself. He's been saying this for quite some time. He's made it very, very clear through the press. Rahm has many, many friends among reporters, goes out of his way to keep those ties with journalists, returns calls. He's a great source for reporters, and liked by a lot of reporters because he's very funny, and he's the crudest person in the whole world. As you know, President Obama said, in fact, when he lost his middle finger in a meat slicing accident as a child, at which point the president said he went mute. So he's a colorful character and people love him. But this drama has been playing out on the pages of America's newspapers for an amazingly long time. You'd think if I were the president, I'd call Emanuel into my office and say, hey, shut up, no mas. But they haven't done that. It's amazing. With
Mr. Orszag leaving, is this the first sort of wave we'll start to see of people talking about leaving after the midterm elections or around that time of cycle?
Yeah, it's a little odd that to announce this right now, because obviously people will read a lot into it. It's entirely possible, and we often discount this in a very cynical way, but it's entirely possible that this is a personal decision. I mean, this is a guy who is getting married and has some, pretty complicated personal things going on, I think, and that could be the impetus behind it. I wouldn't discount that at all.
Woodbury Heights, New Jersey. Christopher, Independent Line, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Tucker, I just wanted to start the comment, my question, by just saying that I think that the president is just totally incompetent on so many levels, especially with this oil spill. And I wanted to get your opinion as to when they were commenting, when the Republican, I think it was one of the Republican senators or congressmen, commented that this is a shakedown of BP for the funding that they're trying to get together to be there to help people with any damages that occurred from the oil spill. It kind of reminded me of the Katrina funds that were set up and the monies that never reached the people who were harmed by the disaster. And it just seems to me that, in a way I could understand why the senator or congressman had commented that it was a shakedown, because really the money is just going to sit there like it's sitting there for, like the trailers that never got used. They're just sitting there in the sun and rotting. And the monies that were never dispersed to the people who were injured, it doesn't make sense to be setting up this fund when there's nobody to give it to, there's nobody to direct the monies to as to where you're going to target it to actually fix things.
Right. That's a good point. I think the idea behind it, and it was a shakedown, obviously. There was a gun on the table during those negotiations, metaphorically. The idea, I think, though, was let's get this money up front. We know that BP is going to have to come up with it in the end anyway. Let's put it in, as Al Gore famously said, a lockbox. I think that was the idea, and it's not an entirely crazy idea. Yes, there was an enormous amount of waste in response to Katrina, and very little reporting on that waste, certainly not enough. I think the feeling was, well, this is a terrible tragedy, and of course it was. I was there for it. It was bad, as you know. But the idea was, if we just spend enough money, everything will be fine. And not enough people cared to take a very close look at exactly how that money was being spent. It's the same old story. In this case, one hopes, and I assume, that the overwhelming majority of the money that goes to cleaning up this spill into compensating people affected by it will be private money from BP. And so that's not, to be completely blunt, as great a concern as, for people looking out for the public's good, because it's not public money, right? So if BP gets fleeced, well, it's up to BP to prevent that, not us.
You talk about BP being strong-armed into this. What would be the alternative if, as you advocate for smaller government not as involved in this process, do you think it should go through the court system? Do you think BP would have stepped up on its own through its corporate responsibility?
Well, I doubt BP would have stepped up on its own. I think it's important to obey the law. I don't think, if it needs to go through the courts, then that's kind of how we decide things, like in the end. It's time-consuming, and it's often frustrating, and the results produced are not always the ones that we would want. But we kind of have to do that.
Republicans, including Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, have said there needs to be some accountability for BP, some mandate that they pay up, because the court systems, in her view, did not serve the Exxon Valdez plaintiffs well.
Well, that may be true.
The
courts didn't serve, Nicole Simpson's family very well either. Do you know what I mean? Like, courts reach conclusions we don't agree with, but we obey them anyway because that's what it means to live in a civilized country. You can't just say, well, you're guilty. I know you are. We saw you do it. Pow, I'm executing you. As sort of enjoyable as that might be. Like, we can't do that.
Let's go to Clinton Township, Michigan, where David is on our Republicans line. Hi, David.
Good morning. Good morning, Tucker.
Good morning.
Good morning, young lady. I don't know
morning.
your name. This is the first time I've ever seen you.
Libby Casey.
Okay, thank you. I want to speak to you as a journalist, okay? Before you came on, there was a gentleman that come on, and he stated that Republican conservatives hate Barack Obama. Why do you think that is? I don't hate the guy. I just dislike his policies.